Good morning, everyone. Today, I have Alec with me and myself, Malini Sengupta. I am the Yellowknife Immigration Partnership Coordinator based out of Yellowknife Integrated Service Center. And I have with me Alec. Alec, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Alexander Kovacevic. I'm an Immigration Recruitment Career Officer within SEDEPNO, Economic Development Council of Northwest Territories.
Great. One of the reason me and Alec, we decided to do this webinar because we have had a lot of clients in the last couple of months who had been requesting this information on how to become a permanent resident and what are the different programs and what are the options for nominee in LWT. One of the main reasons we are focusing today on the economic class and under the economic class, there are the three major programs which we will be focused, and the nominee is because of this particular statistics. So if you look at it overall in Canada, we have most of the people who are coming in to Canada is under the economic class, whereas the family class only comprises of 20 to 30%, and the refugee is only 10 to 15%. It's a similar thing in NWT. And over the period of last 1 year, we have seen a lot of clients, and most of the clients is basically people on a work permit or an open work permit, that's post-graduation open work permit, or spouse who are dependent who also has open work permit. So predominantly in Yellowknife, it is also 67% is economic class, whereas around 20% is family sponsorship, around 10% is refugee, and the rest are others. So looking at the statistics overall in Canada and overall in NWT, specifically Yellowknife, we decided to talk about basically the three major economic class program. So we're going to talk about express entry. This is where me and Alec, we've been meeting over 40, 50 clients in the last couple of months. During COVID, all the applications IRCC has moved online. If you want to do a paper application, be prepared. It will go up to, if it is a PNP, it will go up to almost 20 months. And not only that, we don't even know when they're going to open your application. So right now, we want to help you guys to create an express entry profile. You can be eligible under three particular programs. One is Federal Skilled Worker, the other one is CEC, and Federal Skilled Trade. So you have to be eligible in order to be having an express entry profile into the pool if you're eligible in any of these three classes. I'm going to deep dive into Federal Skilled Worker, but we will also talk about the NWT nominee program too. So organize your brain. There are 4 programs. Please, we have had a lot of clients coming out here and saying, hey, we have to have 1 year of work experience. Oh, we have to do this. No, there are 4 particular programs: Federal Skilled Worker, CEC, which is you have to have 1 year of work experience in Canada. You have FST, Federal Skilled Trade, and you have PNP, which is the NWT nominee program. In this, FSW and FST, you can apply for within and outside Canada. CEC also, you can apply from within and outside Canada, but CEC, you have to have a Canadian work experience. And obviously, the nominee program, which we are going to talk about later. So I'm going to dive in with Federal Skilled Worker program. There are 4 important things which we are going to talk about, including the 5th is the settlement one. First thing is you have to have at least 1 year of continuous full-time or equivalent part-time work experience in NOC, O, A, and B.
Yes, when we are talking about NOC, in fact, Malini, can you show us NOC matrix link?
Yeah, it's there.
Okay, we have a link here of National Occupational Classification Matrix, which provides an overview, in fact, of the entire occupational classification structure based on skill levels and skill types. So skill level 0 corresponds to occupation that usually require university education and several years of experience. We are talking here more about managerial positions in various fields. There's then skill level A, corresponds to occupations that usually require university education, for example, dentist or HR. And skill level B corresponds to occupation that usually require college education or apprenticeship training. For example, office administrative assistants or fishermen.
Great. Awesome. So what Alec just said is extremely, extremely crucial. So in order to be applying for FSW, you have to know under which NOC your particular job falls under. Next important thing is the language. In order to be eligible under FSW, you have to have a CLB level 7 in your language abilities.
Yeah, a lot of clients, for example, they ask themselves, how do I find my CLB level with my test results? And you can find the Canadian language benchmark or CLB level of your language test results for CELPIP, IELTS, or TEF. TEF, it's le test d'évaluation du français. With this language test equivalency charts. So the CLB level is what you will use on your permanent residence application. And the language tests are valid for 2 years. Malini, will you explain more in detail how it works?
Yeah, that's a really good information, Alec. What you just gave was they have this language test. If you take, it's for 2 years. So in English, there are 2 tests. One is CELPIP General and one is IELTS General. And in French, you have TIF, TEF, and you have TCF. If you're looking at the CELPIP level 7, so like, we say, hey, you have to get a CLB level 7. What exactly is CLB level? So if you look at this chart, in CELPIP, in order to get a CLB level 7, you have to have in all of the 4 abilities 7. Whereas in IELTS, in order to get 7, you have to have on all abilities 6. In TIF and if TCF, they are different. So make sure you go into this chart in IRCC in order to make sure you get the right CLB level and right points for each of the language. Next is education. So in education, in order to be eligible under FSW, you have to complete a secondary or post-secondary, and your education has to be evaluated by what we call a ECA, Education Assessment Evaluation, which is done by WES.
Can you explain that more in detail? Yes, that's WES.
Yeah, so WES is basically one of the education, let me just, ECA. So if you go to ECA IRCC, so Education Credential Assessment, what happens, let's say you have graduated from France or India, or let's say you have graduated from any of the Latin American countries, your education, let's say you have done a bachelor's, this has to be evaluated by WES, and they will give you an equivalence report. With that, once you come out here, you will know that how much of points you will get. So let's say your 3 years of bachelor's and 2 years of master's, let's say or 1 year of master's in any of the country might be equivalent to 4 years of bachelor's in Canada. So depending on that, you will get those points. Next important thing is 67 points. So in order to be eligible under FSW, you have to get a 67 points out of 100. And what are the parameters? Parameters is language, education, work experience, age, arranged employment, and adaptability. Also, another very important thing to remember is settlement funds.
Yeah, for example, if you're invited to apply under the Federal Skilled Worker Program or Federal Skilled Trades Program, you will need to show that you meet the settlement funds requirements, unless you're currently authorized to work in Canada and have a valid job offer from an employer in Canada. And when we are talking about settlement funds, for proof, you must get official letters from any banks or financial institution where you're keeping money. Malini, what's exactly the amount needed?
So what Alec, you just said is really, really important, that you need to get a bank certificate or a bank statement in order to prove that you have the funds. And in order to be eligible under FSW or any of the programs where proof of fund is needed, as a principal applicant, you're just a single applicant, you need to have a 12,960 in your account. If you have a family of 4, you have to have a 24,083. So have a look at this chart. Also make sure your settlement funds should not be sudden funds. So for example, you want to apply under express entry today and you have, let's say, I don't know, 2,000. Don't just put 20,000, make it 24,000. And then you have to make sure your bank account is active, alive, and you are getting salary in those accounts, okay? So that's pretty much what we talk about under federal skill. So federal skill worker, you need to have 67 points. The few other highlights which I want to kind of let you know. If you are self-employed, your basically self-employment is a eligible work in Canada and outside Canada. Another really good thing is when you are a student, you can count your skill work while as a student outside Canada and in Canada as eligible work. One important thing you have to remember, the number 1 point, which was the 1 year of work experience in that NOC, OA, and B, it has to be under 1 knock. But where else in number point 4, selection factor, under work experience, that work experience can be in different NOC. I'm going to move into Canadian experience class, and Alec is going to explain to you that a little bit more about it.
Yeah, what I found interesting, in Canadian experience class is that, for example, if your employer is not able to sponsor you, SEC class or Canadian experience class could be interesting. Anybody who is NWT and worked for 1 year in NOC 0, A or B category. So, and combination of categories also is allowed, but you should work at least 12 months paid or have at least 1,560 hours of work.
Yeah. So Alec, this is a good point. So when you say 1,560 hours, that means minimum of 30 hours into 52 weeks. So that's the number of hours you should have full-time or part-time equivalent.
Yes, and also language, about the language, yes, concerning language requirements, the candidate needs to have a CLB 7 or higher, but for 0 and A category, and CLB 5 for B category. So it's a bit less. And what's interesting also, it's for the implied status. Now we have a lot of candidates with who are in implied status. It counts here. However, here self-employment and student work does not count.
So this is the major difference. As Alex said, the student, when they're working, that is not counted, whereas in FSW it is counted. And one great news about being implied status. So let's say you are a student and you're working part-time, and you completed your program, and now you have applied for a work permit and you have not received your work permit. You're in an implied status. So if you have started working, that definitely will count. Or you're a worker, or you're on IEC visa, and now your employer has applied for your LMIA, you have applied for a work permit extension or for a new work permit, you're on an implied status, that will count.
Yeah, and what's also very cool with this class is, what can be very attractive to some candidates, is that job offer, education, and settlement funds are not required. And the person does not to be in Canada physically while applying. That's also very interesting. Malini, will you explain a federal skilled trades class now?
Yes, so next is, I think you basically just moved into federal skill trade. So we'll skip the last slide. There you go, okay. Federal skill trade. Okay, all yours.
Oh yeah, okay. Yes, for federal skilled trades, to be eligible, you must have 2 years of full-time or equivalent work permit in skilled trade within the last 5 years, and you must meet the job requirements in NOC. So skill level C corresponds to occupations that usually require secondary school and or occupation specific training. Completion of 3 to 4 years apprenticeship program, or a combination of over 4 years of work experience in trade and some high school, college or industry courses in, for example, in carpentry, is usually required to be eligible for trade certification. What's also interesting is LMIA-based job offer of working in Canada on employer-specific work permits, or you have to have a red seal. You must meet also as well the required language levels for each language ability. So when we are talking about that, for writing and reading, you have to have a CLB level 4, and for speaking and listening 5. The candidate also has to have at least 2 years of full-time work experience or an equal amount of part-time work experience in skilled trade within the 5 years before the candidate applies. Meet the job requirements for the skilled trade and set out in the National Occupation Classification, and have a valid job offer of full-time employment for a total period or at least 1 year or certificate of qualification in the skilled trade issued by Canadian provincial, territorial, or federal authority. So what's interesting here, there is no education requirement for the federal skilled trades program. But on the other side, on the other slide, that's interesting when you're talking about some professions and trades, about regulations. Some professions and trades are regulated in Canada to protect public health and safety. That means that you must have a license or certificate to work in these professions and trades. In some professions and trades, it is illegal to work or even use the title of the profession or trade if you are not registered with the regulatory body. In other professions and trade, you can do the work, for example, but you must register with the regulatory body if you want to use the title of the profession or trade. So in Canada, professions and trades, what is important are regulated in each province. So there are regulatory bodies, or it means organizations that control licenses and certificates in each province. If you get a license or certificate, it is valid in one province. But if you move, for example, to another province, you have to apply for a license or a certificate again. Let's illustrate that with this an example on these slides. So here we have like George and Tom. They're both carpenters. Neither have a red seal as a carpenter in Canada, and both are on LMI-based work permits. George has been working as a carpenter for 2 years. In 2 years in Ontario, in Quebec, where carpentry is a regulated trade. So, and Tom has been working as a carpenter for 2 years in Northwest Territories, where it is not regulated trade. So, so George work as a carpenter is not qualifying work in FST, while Tom's work as a carpenter is qualifying work in FST. So that's pretty interesting. So you have to have you have to be aware that about the regulations in each province or territory, because it differs. And so work as an would like also to mention that work as an apprentice in a regulated or licensed trade does not count as qualifying work to meet eligibility requirements in FST, but it is still skilled work and may count for CRC points later. So that's interesting.
And we are sorry about there's some typo in the presentation. So basically the focus was on a carpenter rather than on a plumber. So now moving into, so we covered what we call FSW, we covered CEC, and we covered FST. So FSW and CEC and FST, you can apply all of those three within Canada and outside Canada. FSW has 67 points. CEC, you have to have 1 year of work experience, and federal skilled trade is you have to have 2 years of work experience in the skilled trade. All are different programs and all have different points depending on your abilities and depending on your work experience and your education qualification. Now, you have to understand, we're going to move into nominee program. So NWT nominee program under employer-driven stream, there are 3. Entry level, skilled worker, NWT express entry. here we are talking about express entry. So you have to understand that you have to have an express entry profile under those top 3, FSW, CEC, or FST. Then you apply for nominee, and the nominee should be issued after your express entry profile, or else your APR, which is application for permanent residency, will be refused. Okay, you have to include settlement fund if you don't have arranged employment. You have to think and think again how to create your profile of express entry in the first place, under which particular the program which we spoke about. Now we're going to move into NWT nominee program. So this is where it gets extremely interesting. So you can apply for a nominee program without express entry and do a paper application. I spoke about this. Basically, if you do a nominee program, you get 600 points. So the total point system in Canada under CRS is 1200. So a lot of time what's happening is you have the work experience, you have the language, you have the education, but the points are really high. Let's say the points are over 500 or 470. Between 470 to 500, you're not getting enough points under FSW, CEC, or FST. That's where you apply for nominee program to get that 600 points, and then you get the ITA. So the first program which I'm going to talk about is the skilled worker is quite similar to federal skilled worker. In this, you have to have a 1 year of full-time work experience under that particular nominee occupation in the last 10 years. It has to be NOC, OA, and B. You have to have an employment which is full-time, permanent, and have to be 37.5 hours, not like CEC. CEC, you can also be eligible under 30 hours. It has to be 37.5 hours because this is the NWT requirement. Language, if you have a higher NOC, which is O and A, you have to have a CLB level 7. And if it is NOC B, for example, a fisherman is NOC B, you have to have a CLB level 5. Valid temporary residence status. So this is different from BC and other provinces. Here, you have to have a valid work permit or authority to work without LMIA. Or if you are on an open work permit, you have to have your employer meet the job advertisement requirement, because if you come on an LMIA, they've already done the recruitment process. And the employer should be registered under NWT for minimum of 1 year. And there are other requirements Alec is going to discuss in the next slide, which is NWT nominee program, entry level skilled worker or semi-skilled worker.
Yes, we call it entry level or semi-skilled occupations. Category is intended to assist employers, in fact, with critical labor shortages that cannot be filled by permanent residents or Canadian citizens. So this category is designed to increase the labor pool for entry-level jobs within the NOC skill level C and D. We already mentioned skill level C, so it's intermediate jobs, usually requiring high school or job-specific training. And we talk now about skill level D. These are labor jobs. So skill level D corresponds to occupations for which on-the-job training is usually provided. So let's say trades, helpers, construction laborers, and related occupations. The term of employment must be, so for a permanent full-time position, minimum 37.5 hours per week. And the employment contract has to be consistent with the Northwest Territories employment standards. Nominee applicants that completed education outside of Canada must have their international education credentials assessed to compare them to education standards in Canada. And for the purpose of consistency, the NTNP will only accept the IRCC approved educational credentials. Nominee applicants must be
do a WES, Alec.
Sorry?
They just have to do a WES.
That's have to do, yes, exactly. And nominee applicants must be able to communicate in one of Canada's official languages, English or French. Nominee applicants being supported under the entry level, so semi-skilled occupation stream, national occupation classification skill level C and D must undergo mandatory language testing and achieve a minimum language standards of the Canadian language benchmark level CLB 4 in either English or French across all 4 categories. Also, what is important is to have a valid temporary residence status, and nominee applicants are required also to have $10,000 for themselves and an additional $2,000 for each accompanying dependent. So, for example, if we are talking about if a nominee applicant's dependents include a spouse and 2 children, it will be 16,000. Yeah. And at the end, just to mention that employer's business has to be registered at least for 1 year prior to application. It should prove as financial statements, T4s, lease agreements, and other relevant documentation related to eligibility criteria.
Awesome. We basically covered a lot of things. I want to wrap up on few important things, some of the general points. So if you're doing a language test, okay, I'm going to just jump back between these two. So the skilled worker in nominee program under NWT and entry level is skilled worker needs 1 year of full-time work experience in the last 10 years. In this, it is very, very important. Anybody who is entry-level, semi-skilled worker or critical worker have to have work experience under the NOC, CND, 6 months in NWT of the employer who they are nominating, okay? Okay, important points, IELTS and CELPIP has to be general, okay? Language test is valid for 2 years. ECA, WES, which we keep on talking about, expires after 5 years. FSW and FST, if you have a LMIA supported work, you do not need settlement fund. FST, which is federal skilled, qualifying work experience is only after you finish your practice. Unlike in FSW, if you're a student, you can still count. Canadian experience class never requires settlement fund. Okay, so we are always talking about express entry, express entry, express entry. What is a profile? Profile is not an application. It's just creating an online profile. It's an express of entry saying, hey, Canada, pick me up, yay, yay. It's an algorithm. It's we call a global system, which is not done by any IRCC officer. Everybody comes into the pool, let's say 60, 70,000 applicants in a month, and then they draw out of that pool. Basically, you're putting into your profile based on your eligibility, FSW, FST, or CEC, and then you get a CRS points. Out of the 60,000, whoever has highest point will get the ITA, which is the invitation. After receipt of ITA, you will have 60 working days to complete your no, not 60 working days. You have 60 total days in order to finish your permanent residency application. This is the CRS points. The total CRS points is 1,200, okay? If you are single or a principal applicant who are applying on its own, and you are married and you are applying along with your spouse. It's always very critical. Sometimes you will see if your spouse is not holding equivalent education, language, work, and age, they have higher chances to reduce your points. So if you look at the point system of a single or a non-accompanying spouse applicant, they get more points. So 110 for age, education 150, 136 for first language, which is English, and then French, which is 24, 80 points for your Canadian work experience. In B, if you don't have a spouse, you basically don't get this point. You have around 40 points across education, language, and Canadian work experience. Then skill transferability, it's 150 points across. Here, if you will only get 50 points if you have certificate of qualification for trade. So this is mostly for federal skilled trade people. And then if you have siblings, fantastic. If you have relatives who are your brothers and sisters, you get 15 points. If you know French, that's even more great. You get 30 more points. Canadian post-secondary means you have graduated from Canada. You get around 30 points. If you have arranged employments, let's say if you have an LMI-based work permit, you get 200 points. Bingo is nominee program. If you have an employer who's going to sponsor you, this is where you make the maximum points. And a lot of time nowadays, you need a nominee because the points are going really high. There are 2 draws every month. I'm going to get into the question, but I'm going to quickly show you. So this is the website to calculate your CRS points. So we're going to quickly calculate Alec's points. So let's say Alec is my client. He comes to me, say, hey, Malini, I want to apply under express entry. Can I calculate my points? So this is where you're going to go. You're going to say, what's your status? I'm going to put single. I don't even know if Alec is single or not, but this is what I'm going to put. Let's say we put his age roughly around 40. His education is, let's say, master's. Yes, he has graduated from Canada, and it is a degree, official language. Yes, he has done, he knows both French and English, so that's even more advantage. Let's say we are doing FSW, so he has got 7 CLB levels, 7 minimum in all the scores. Yes, he knows TIFF. He is a native French speaker. I'm going to give a really, really good points for French too, but remember, you can get maximum of 30 points. Work experience, yes, he has, I think, more than, I'm going to hear, I know he's been here for a long time. I'm just going to say he's been here for a year in Canada. And in the last 10 years, he has over 3 years of international work experience. Yes, he has a nomination certificate for NWT, and it is skill level OA and B. Yes, he has a skill level, let's say OA and B. He has a nomination certificate. Yes, he does not have spouse, so it's going to be a no. And then we calculate his points, and you will see, voila, he's got out of 1,200, 127 points. So this basically shows that he not only qualifies, he has enough points to apply through express entry, and that's a 6 months. Yay, I know, 6 months processing time. Before we go, I'm going to show you the processing time a little bit, because this is really important, and that's why me and Alec, we've been spending such a long time to explain you why express entry. So look at this. You have applied for permanent residency, okay, under, let's say, economic immigration, and you have done, let's say, PNP, okay, and you basically have not done an online. So I'm going to put here, and you haven't yet applied, let's say right now you haven't. Look at this, 15 to 19 months. So if you are doing a PNP program with express entry, 6 months, right? So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, any comments, please reach out to Alec or myself. You will have our contact details, I think, beginning of the slide. And sorry, don't, but we will put our contact details for you. And thank you so much for your time, Alec.
Thank you.